Welcome to this review of Ghostbusters 2016, also marketed as Ghostbusters Answer the Call. I have had a lot of pent-up feelings about this movie since it was first released, and being that it was a slow work day and I decided I would commit to what most people use the internet for, complaining about movies. I regard the majority of remakes that are produced by Hollywood today as an indication of a major decline of Western civilization, or at least Western cinema. Ghostbusters 2016 is one of the most egregious offenders, and I would like to discuss all of the reasons why I think this movie is so incredibly bad and should not have been made as it was made, and it could have been so much better. Now, Ghostbusters 2016 is, of course, a remake of the original movie, Ghostbusters 1984. The original movie is almost universally heralded by critics and audiences as an epic comedy film that helped define the movies of the 80s, as can be seen here by these numbers from RottenTomatoes.com. Ghostbusters 2016 is an absolute failure as a movie, and it should only be watched as a cautionary tale on how not to make remakes. I'm actually discouraged by the large number of critics who actually like this movie. I would suggest to any of these 74% polled by Rotten Tomatoes to quit their line of work immediately. As for the audiences, if you were in the 51% who said they liked this movie, I humbly suggest you reconsider after listening to this review. First, I have to say up front what this review is not about. It is not about addressing the controversies that preceded this movie's release. You can break this movie down into a single line concept. Ghostbusters remake, but with all-female cast. Now, two objections that do exist from this simple concept are an objection to the first part, the remake, or an objection to the second, the all-female cast. Objections simply on these matters could be summarized under nostalgia and misogyny. That is, I hate it because I love the original so much, and I hate anything trying to remake it on principle, and I hate it because it is an all-female cast, and I either hate women or feel that this is somehow impugning upon my masculinity or some other such thing by having an all-female team. Yeah, so this is neither of those things. I do not object to remaking Ghostbusters, nor do I have any problem with an all-female team. This review is about how horribly the execution of this movie failed from a storytelling, narrative, and movie-making process. This has a slow build-up, so bear with me. I believe there are three elements that go into making a great movie. These elements are simply story, characters, and emotion. These elements are all interwoven, so please do not get hung up on where they appear on this circle. You can move them around anywhere and make it work. The story element is pretty simple to understand and is the plot or what the movie is about. It originates with the screenwriter, and if it is based on a novel or a play, then with the author as well. The characters are who the movie is about. This goes beyond simply what is written and is driven by the actors playing them, which is why casting is so crucial. The emotion element refers to the overall tone of the movie, something highly tied up in the editing and choreographic process. The one who binds all these things together and influences all of them is the director, which is why having a knowledgeable and competent director is so important to making a great film. So before I discuss the new movie and what went wrong, I have to take some time talking about the original and how these elements that I've laid out here relate to the making of it. It is a really a great story about creating art through adversity. So let's start with the story concept and go from there. Ghostbusters was first conceived of by Dan Aykroyd, who envisioned it as a buddy movie for himself and John Belushi coming off their success with the Blues Brothers. Aykroyd has had a lifelong fascination with the paranormal and envisioned a truly epic film in its scope. His original script had ghostbusting as a normal profession, almost more like firefighters, and the movie was to be set in the future with the team traveling through space and time and battling all sorts of giants and demons. Tragically, John Belushi died before the movie could be realized. Enter Ivan Reitman. He read the original screenplay and wanted to be involved, but he immediately recognized that Aykroyd's vision wasn't practical. The special effects weren't there, and even if they were, the movie would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So he sat down with Aykroyd and pitched a rewrite. Dan, how about we set it in modern day New York and make it about these guys starting up a business? I think it speaks very highly of Aykroyd that he was so willing to change his script. So then they brought in Harold Ramis, and the three of them together reworked the script. This is also where they brought in Bill Murray, and again, it speaks well to Aykroyd that he was willing to take on a more supporting role and let Murray kind of move to the center stage. Now, regarding the characters, the actors had a large part in influencing the development of these characters and why they turned out so memorable. While the part of Dana Barrett was in the script, for example, she was in an undeveloped stage. Reitman considered hiring Julia Roberts for the part. Then along came Sigourney Weaver, and history changed for the better here. She had done sci-fi and serious movies already and wanted something comedic. According to the legends, it was Sigourney Weaver who suggested the idea that Dana Barrett be possessed and turn into a dog, and she drove this point home by crawling around on all fours and barking like a dog for Reitman in his office. Reitman absolutely loved it and immediately hired her on the spot and reworked the script accordingly. Now, for the Louis Tully character, they initially envisioned John Candy in the part and wrote him as a kind of sleazy used car salesman. John Candy apparently had a lot of bizarre demands, like wanting the character to speak with a German accent and have a pair of German shepherds, and when Reitman pushed back on these demands, Carey passed on the picture, which is when along came Rick Moranis, and he was like, John Candy is an idiot for passing on this movie. I will absolutely take this spot in a heartbeat. So he was hired, and the character was reworked into becoming the lovable, nerdy accountant that we know him to be in the final product. Now, the emotion element was achieved because you had such an amazing director in Ivan Reitman. I'll be talking more on this later, but let me take a quick aside here to explain a little bit more about what I mean regarding tone and how a movie is filmed and how that affects how the audience responds and feels. Now, let's say, for example, that your screenplay just has a simple direction, which is main character gets shot and killed. Now, of course, that reads very simple on paper, but the emotional element is going to dictate how that gets played out. And it has all to do with not only the director's style and method, but also things like who is the target audience? What is the movie going to be rated? Is it more family film? Is it more serious sort of thing? Is it PG? Is it R? What exactly are they going for? So something as simple as, main character gets shot and killed can be played out in a number of different ways. It can be off screen, or it can be very much on screen, but a little restrained in terms of violence, or it can be completely unrestrained in the violence and just sort of explode in a fountain of death, if that's sort of what you're going for. What's that, Kyle? You say I've just spoiled these movies for you? I should have said spoiler alert. Oh, well, sorry about that. But, two of them are, well, one's probably older than you are, and the other one is older than your father. And as for the third movie of this little three ones here, it's based on historical events. So I don't feel too bad about spoilers. Thanks. All right, so now that we have some groundwork laid, let's examine some of this background for how the new Ghostbusters came to be and how these elements tie into it. The driving force behind the remake was a man named Paul Feig, who served not only as a director, but as one of the screenwriters. Katie Dippold also served as a screenwriter, but based on some of the interviews I have seen or read, it appears that she had a somewhat darker film in mind and was overridden a lot by Feig. So fair or not, I'm going to hold Paul Feig as responsible for pretty much everything that went wrong with this movie, which this is appropriate that when you have a group effort, when the group succeeds, the group gets the credit, but when the group fails, then the leader of the group, and in this case, the director is very much the leader, he has to be held responsible. I genuinely believe that Paul Feig failed to understand storytelling, and he failed to understand the emotional element of making movies. I think he thought that because he had these four really talented actresses for this movie, their performances would be enough to make a great movie regardless of those other two elements. Like, hey, 4 great actresses playing 4 really interesting and funny characters. The rest of it really doesn't matter. Well, that's not true, and I'd like to examine in this review why that isn't true. There are many different ways of doing a remake depending on what the intent is, what exactly it is that you're going for, whether you're trying to retell a story or retell an earlier movie in just a newer and more modern way, or if you're focusing more on like concept or maybe even just focusing on a character and telling a new story. So how did Paul Feig decide to go about remaking Ghostbusters? Was it more, hey, I want to retell the same story? Or was it more, well, I like this concept and I want to, retell this concept or these characters? Well, it wasn't the characters, clearly, because it was all about the new characters. So his decision was basically to retell the exact same story, but with new characters and only this similar concept, but without any of the original themes or what really magic that made the original movie such a masterpiece.
It's not the same story at all. It's a completely different story.
No, it's the same story, the same exact plot points, just retold. You can do a side by side and it pretty much leaps right off the page at you, or excuse me, right off the screen. That they basically hit every single major plot point, from them getting fired to them finding a building and, messing with the EPA and the mayor and the ghosts escaping and, the ghosts running amok. And every single plot point was essentially the same, but just made in a much, much inferior manner because they lost sight of certain things like the themes and tone and purpose of the original movie. So much of what happens in the new movie happens because it happened in the original, but with some major changes. And the result is that Paul Feig is basically playing Jenga with the new story and is completely out of his depth. His failure to understand the story and emotional elements of the original movie and just slapping them around with this new movie, they kind of result in all these blocks coming tumbling right down on it. Now, Ivan Reitman believed that if you slowly introduced an audience to a concept while grounding it in things from which they are familiar, then they'll better accept what they're seeing. And this is the reason why so many of these scenes exist in the original movie. Scenes like them being fired, to them seeking out a loan, to acquiring the firehouse, to getting Ecto 1. All of these are steps leading you further and further in to where when you actually see them as Ghostbusters, you've pretty much gone there and accepted it. But in the new movie, these scenes only exist because they existed in the original movie. They are totally irrelevant and frankly wrong given the absurdist tone of the movie and even the overall themes that this movie is trying to establish. And worse, they're a constant reminder compelling the audience to compare this to the original film. And when you're trying to stand out as different and unique, this is a bad step to take. The new movie's theme is a huge departure from the original. Basically, the first movie is about the Ghostbusters starting a business. It's often lauded as the ultimate small business movie. And the driving force behind it is Venkman's desire to get rich in starting this ghost-busting business. But the theme of the new movie is that the ladies want to get respect in academic circles and possibly help people, but we'll get into more of that later. The original movie builds on the theme of the guys turning a defeat, getting fired and disgraced from academia, into a success. A huge success. Once they leave the university, they never look back. They don't care what the university thinks or what any other scientists think about them anymore. And one of the most memorable parts of the first movie is the montage of the Ghostbusters becoming wildly successful. They're in all the major newspapers and magazines. They're mentioned on the radio and on TV and national news. Maybe they're not billionaires by the middle of the movie, but they certainly are enjoying their new celebrity status. This pays off too regarding Venkman's character. At the start of the movie, he's a lazy con man out to sleep with women to the point of being pretty highly unethical. By the middle part of the movie, he could have easily dismissed Dana and her case and focused on picking up more women, but we see that he genuinely cares about Dana. And he even has some standards that, like, he won't sleep with her when she's possessed, although he may have just been, scared out of his mind to sleep with a crazy possessed dog lady at this point. I guess that's debatable. And yeah, I don't know what the deal was with him having all that Thorazine on him either. I know that's a huge discussion on the internet, but I'm just going to go ahead and table that for now. The point is that by the end of the movie, we have a huge payoff in Peter kind of basically having this development. Venkman has an actual arc where his motivations change from the want of, hey, let's get rich, to a need of, hey, let's be heroes. Now, because it's a Bill Murray character, this is not like a huge, completely all-encompassing change, and I'm sure Venkman is still concerned with his bottom line and is not a saint by any stretch of the imagination, but at least, hey, it's a little bit of progress as a human being. I mean, frankly, if he was a 100% completely different person, then he wouldn't be as likable or as much fun. Now, back to the new movie. It's about them getting respect by proving the ghosts are real, and therefore by all these people in the academic world will respect them. Like, what people exactly are we talking about? Like these people shooting Erin dirty looks in the hallway? Or her jerk boyfriend? Or Dean Tywin Lannister? I mean, none of these people ever really come up anywhere again in the film in any kind of meaningful way. Also, the emotional tone of the movie is really not conducive to this theme of let's get respect, because the world that they have created, the world they have set these ladies in, is tailored so that the audience watching the movie takes nothing seriously. Everything is a joke or a parody of real life. Like, let's take a look at some of the supporting characters in this movie to really drive home this point. We'll start with the tour guide at the beginning of the movie, who tells his audience when he's giving them a tour of this mansion about how a poor woman and her child gave up their seat on a lifeboat on the Titanic so that a clock could be saved, and now this clock is hung in the house or standing in the house. I forget if it was a hanging clock or a grandfather clock, and I really don't want to go back and watch just for the sake of this little point here. But my guess is that this actor, who I know him as Gabe from The Office, I forget his real name, but my guess is that he ad-libbed this line. Zach Woods, I think that's his name. Anyway, my guess is that he ad-libbed this line, and Paul Feig just loved it so much, said, yeah, let's keep this in the movie, without really deciding to ask any questions about, hey, what does this really mean? What is the implication here? Now, I'm going off on kind of a sidebar here regarding this, because this joke and this character, they start off the movie, and typically the first scene of the movie will set the tone for the entire picture. So the tour guide here, he plays this joke perfectly straight, like this was a serious thing and that this was a real thing that happened. Now, in the real life, if a tour guide told an audience, oh yeah, some poor woman and her child, they died, but hey, we saved a clock, and that's really cool. Look at this clock. The reaction in real life would be horror. People would be like, oh my gosh, that's a terrible thing. But, everybody in the tour group is just like, oh wow, that's really cool. I can't wait to see this clock. And yeah, so right there, it sort of establishes it as this bizarre, parody of reality. I can't say that enough times. So right out of the gate, you're setting that up as this world. But anyway, enough of a tangent there. Let's look at some of the other supporting characters. You have the second dean, the one that fires them from the university in this incredibly immature and inappropriate way. And oh, hey, by the way, he's so incredibly dumb, he doesn't even know how to spell science correctly. And look at all the different ways he can flip people off. Hilarious. Well, there's the mayor, who is so incredibly dumb that when he saw a stage magic trick of a woman being sawn in half, he genuinely believed it was a woman being sawn in half. He is that dumb. And oh, hey, by the way, he also gets really angry if you compare him to the mayor from the movie Jaws. Uh, oh, good God, it's Kevin. Yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about Kevin later, but yeah, enough to say that again, remember, he confuses sight with hearing. Like he hears a loud noise and he covers his eyes. Yeah. So basically the ladies here, they kind of remind me of Luke Wilson's character in the movie Idiocracy. They're the smartest people in a world full of idiots. Respect. Yeah. That's what it's about. Let's get respect. They do not really help their case any by the attitude of the actual Ghostbusters or their behavior or anything like that. I mean, this movie is pretty much a lot of them doing things like vaginal fart jokes and falling down a lot. Yeah, great directing job there, Paul Feig. Hey, ladies, just say some funny things regardless of context. But remember, your characters want respect, and they're taking this so seriously, and remember that. That's what's sort of driving them. I came across the following quote while looking up some interview stuff regarding this movie, and I think it illustrates the just general incompetence of the creative team behind it. The quote is by Katie Dippold and talks about how she fought to keep the queef joke in the movie and because it was so important. Uh, okay, so this tells me that Miss Dippold was very committed to the idea that as a movie about four women, it is completely appropriate to have a joke about a noise that only women's bodies make, but she never really bothered to ask herself the question, yeah, should I have this in here? Does it impact the characters' motivations? Does this help with their development? Does this do anything for this particular movie? Or is, hey, this just something that I really want to have because, it's a movie about women and this is a women joke. So, yeah. Now, the other motivation the ladies have for starting up Ghostbusters is that they want to help people, I guess. This comes exclusively from a scene I would bet money was added in post-production, and it's the scene where Abby is explaining to the other two the story about a woman on the internet complaining how her house is haunted and how she can't leave. So the point of this scene, I guess, is to try to develop the Ghostbusters by portraying them as compassionate and caring people. But this again is where Paul Feig failed to understand the concept of emotion and how you can incorporate things like tone into conveying a message. In film, everything is about the visuals. Just having them talk about a woman off screen doesn't really impact the audience in any big way, especially when it is completely dismissed by the fact that when the ladies do get their first job, it's not clearing some poor lady's house, but it's actually at this huge concert venue where everything is played for laughs. So, maybe instead of this huge concert venue, they should have actually portrayed some sweet older lady who needs their help and how they interact and how they actually save her house from being haunted. This is where, if they wanted to go with this respect angle, then a huge rewrite of the plot would have been so much better. Now, like in the original movie, the guys are already fired by the time they finish their adventure at the library. Venkman's reputation is well known, and so like even if Ray at this scene depicted here is like, but hey, Dean, we have proof. Let's develop this crappy 80s camera film and you'll see that we have a picture of a ghost. It would be completely believable that the dean would basically refuse to listen and dismiss any purported evidence that they have at this point. But in the new movie, the entire incident of the initial ghost encounter is filmed on these handy Sony camcorders, and Columbia University has no reason to have a negative opinion of Erin's character. It makes no sense that the ladies would just post the part of her being hysterical online and nothing else. In other words, the only thing that could get her fired is what they only posted online. Nothing about that was thought through. It just happened because it happened in the original movie. So instead of, well, the girls get fired because the guys got fired, they really should have gone in a different route. Rather than her being fired, the school could have been like really excited over this idea. Like, oh my gosh, you guys have got some evidence of ghosts, and this is a great thing, and we're going to promote it, and you and your team are going to be at the forefront of all of this stuff. And this, of course, directly would tie into the character's want of being respected. And then maybe you could have something like where, the sweet old lady comes into the picture and be like, my house is haunted. Who am I going to call? And then, of course, Dean Lannister, being the cold and dismissive jerk that he is like, well, hey, how is helping this old lady going to benefit the university? It's not, so she can just kind of go, you know, you know what? And so then the Ghostbusters have a great character arc moment where they set aside what they want, which is being respected by the university, and realize that they have a need, which is to help people. And then they leave the university voluntarily and strike out on their own. I don't know. I just think this would have been a much more compelling and interesting story. And also, because the new movie shifts gears like the original movie to incorporate a plot where the Ghostbusters have to save the world, the whole, want versus need dynamic doesn't really go anywhere. None of the Ghostbusters achieve any kind of real growth as an arc and, just kind of fall by the wayside, tragically. They could have just stuck with the original theme, like have Aaron, who is obviously the replacement for Venkman, be a lazy, ethically questionable character who is all about getting rich. Or, if you don't want a perfect one-for-one correlation, how about having Patty as the business savvy one? Like maybe after the others get fired, they have no idea what to do next, and Patty is the one who recognizes that they're sitting on a gold mine. I love the idea of these ladies going to a bank and trying to convince a loan officer to grant them a small business loan to start a ghostbusting business. I think that is the kind of scene where these women could have really shined and would have been in step with the spirit of the original movie. But hey, the theme is all about respect, and so that's how we got to go. There is only one other topic I want to focus on, and then I'll wrap this review up, and that has to do with the Battle of the Secretaries. You have Janine from the original movie versus Kevin from the new movie. Kevin is one of the absolute low points of the new movie. I do genuinely like Chris Hemsworth. I think he's a talented actor and he's got a great sense of comedic timing. Just watch the movie Thor Ragnarok. It's one of the better movies in the Marvel series, I really do believe. But here again, we see that Paul Feig has no idea what he's doing, and this is why this is such a terrible, terrible disaster of a movie point. Compare Janine's traits where, very numerous. She's witty and smart and competent and compassionate, hardworking, and yeah, somewhat apathetic, like clearly she's more interested in getting a paycheck than in the joys of being a secretary. But overall, she's a tough New Yorker who stands up to both Venkman in insisting he hire more help and to Walter Peck when he tries to storm the building. By contrast, Kevin is attractive and dumber than humanly possible. I mean, he lacks the capacity to pretty much do almost anything, like that chicken from Moana. Aaron's character drools over his good looks, and he is the butt of numerous jokes all about how dumb he is. I don't know, maybe Katie Dippold had to fight to keep the drooling part in, since I'm sure there was some justification about how so many movies objectify women, and by God, a movie featuring all women has the right to objectify a man and portray him as simply a mimbo. I don't know, maybe this fight didn't happen, but like I said, it would not surprise me in the least. Now, if Kevin was just the Janine substitute, it would be, a minor annoyance, but whatever. But he also serves as a Dana substitute in one important respect. He's the one who gets possessed and they have to go rescue in the film's climax. Yeah, this is a huge dramatic misfire. Dana was a driving force in the first movie and was presented as a well-rounded character. She was a smart, successful, single woman who was both skeptical of the idea of ghosts and sees right through Venkman's obviously flirtatious behavior. Before she is possessed, she's not sexualized in any way. She dresses and acts very conservatively, in fact, which is why it is such a huge contrast when she is possessed and becomes, sexy Zool. Let's talk about that possession scene, too. If you saw this movie as a kid like I did, this scene really scared the heck out of here. I mean, it's one of the genuinely scary scenes in the film, and it really hits the audience hard. And it's just, to me, one of the most brilliant bits of filmmaking created by Reitman. I mean, go back and watch this scene and take in all the little subtle cues that are happening in here on a sort of subconscious level. You know, we have this foreshadowing with the weather and showing the terror dogs start to break out of the statue. And then we see Dana alone in her apartment getting undressed and talking to her mother on the phone. Without saying a word, this scene is sending cues to the audience. Whether you recognize it consciously or not, your brain is screaming one thing: vulnerable. She's vulnerable. You know, there's danger, danger, you know, watch out. Something's about to. So compare that with the whole Kevin gets possessed plotline of the new movie. Yeah, so in keeping with the spirit of bad presentations, I'm just going to list out what happens. Bill Murray dies, Abby is briefly possessed, and there's a forced exorcist reference that's played for laughs. And then the ghost flies out the window and possesses Kevin, who, as a reminder, up until this point, was not presented as a human being, but as a complete and utter moron who existed only to be the butt of a joke or as a sex object. Yeah, we're really going to get invested here. You know, ironically, this problem came up during production, but again, since this team was so incompetent, they failed to understand how to make it really work. Katie Dippold had this to say about it. Kevin probably changed the most because originally his character was this apathetic guy. I thought about what would have to be the most frustrating thing for them to deal with in an assistant. Because these people are trying so hard to do this thing, and they're really passionate and trying to prove something. So I thought they'd have this guy who was super apathetic. Then in hindsight, I don't think apathy is the funnest thing to play, and also because we changed it. So he's rescued in the third act. Melissa had a point, like, we need to care about getting this person back. So we started playing around with it, and Chris started improvising a lot, and it kind of became this lovable dummy. So yeah, you kind of understand the point, but just didn't understand the point at the same time. That is to say, they understood the audience had to be invested in Kevin, but they made him into such an extreme caricature and had already built this world as this absurdist parody of reality that there's no possible way anybody's getting invested in Kevin or feeling like he's in any real danger. I mean, only Bill Murray can die and be quickly forgotten about, I guess, in this movie. And even the Ghostbusters themselves talk about getting him back more like he's a pet than an actual human being. But hey, we get this big dance number at the end, and, you know, that was fun and frightening. Yeah. Now, there are plenty of other areas I could nitpick about this movie. You know, the oversaturation of pop culture references, the pacing and delivery of jokes, the distracting cameos, and the sleazy Sony product placement, to name just a few of them. But frankly, I think I've beaten this dead horse enough. There was a lot of great potential for this remake, and it could have been really funny. It could have been a huge phenomenon like the original movie was. I think it had a lot of advantages. It had a huge budget. It had genuinely, you know, funny and talented actors, and the appeal of being such a well-known cultural thing or whatever. But the team in charge was just utterly incompetent. They failed to understand basic movie making, and they failed to understand the spirit and intent of the original movie and why everybody loves it so much. And, you know, worse than all of that, they set out to make a movie about great and strong female characters, but ended up falling flat on their backside because they made a movie that was so unworthy of the characters and even really the people portraying them. So anyway, those are my thoughts. And I just would very much implore you that if you were in that original 51% who liked the movie, please reconsider. Because, you know, I really want Hollywood to do better. I'm insisting that they do better. Please, Hollywood, do better. Make us a better Ghostbusters movie. All right, that's all. Goodbye.